ancient and mysterious, powerful and deadly, all-knowing and generous. The gods of Egypt were many things. They originated many thousands of years ago in a land far away from Egypt. Over time they evolved, changed, adapted, and grew in mystery. Their stories are filled with great battles and vengeance, of cycles of nature and the balance of the very universe. Their tales, a real Game of Thrones. From the gods of the underworld such as Osiris and Anubis, to the gods of light such as Amun-Ra and Horus, the lives and actions of the gods of ancient Egypt explain our very existence and our place in the universe. The mysteries of all that is and ever shall be were explored in their lives. Their influence has travelled across continents and across time. Our own so-called religions are full of them under different names. This is the fascinating story of the real gods of Egypt. The ancient Egyptian religions were very complex. Polytheistic beliefs and multiple rituals formed integral parts of their society. The gods were believed to be in control of and present within the very forces which controlled nature itself. The rituals and practices of the ancient Egyptians were created to gain the favour of the various deities of the various forces of nature in order to control the outcome. Most of the formal practices centred around the pharaoh, who was believed to be God on earth and possess his divine power or force. He was the man between them and the gods. And it was his role to sustain the gods with rituals and offerings, so that they could maintain order in the universe. To make sure this worked, huge efforts were made to provide the pharaoh with what he needed, and the thousands of priests did very well out of the deal. Massive constructions across ancient Egypt were testament to the importance placed upon appeasing and gaining the favour of the gods of force. An individual could pray to a particular deity and ask for help, or he could compel them to do his bidding through magic. One is asking, one is telling. There is a direct correlation between the rise of religious institutions in Egypt with the decline in power of the pharaoh. Death was of major importance, with Egyptians going to great lengths to ensure a safe journey through the underworld for their loved ones. Funerary practices were expensive and often complicated. Tombs, grave goods, mummification, offerings and more all made it a rich man's game, but the poor did what they could. Over time the battle of the gods evolved. Some rose high in prominence, others fell. It was all about the battles between the priests of the competing temples. Ra, Amun and Isis were pushed aside when Akhenaten decided that the temple system would be moved to a new location, and the Aten or sun disk would now hold the greatest slot. It did not last, and his new temple city disappeared beneath the sand. It would be some time before a truly monotheistic religion would rise again. The gods of Egypt arise in a collection of myths from ancient Egypt which describe their actions as a method of understanding the world around them. Understanding the gods of Egypt and their myths is crucial to understanding ancient Egypt itself. There is no separation of church and state, of life and religion, because all are intertwined. From farming to pharmacy, from politics to play, all things involve the gods, for the gods are all things. The myths are inspired by the cycles of nature itself. Life is a series of patterns, repeating again and again. This is the present age to them. Before their time, things were linear, and events unfolded to create the patterns. Ma'at is the fundamental order of the universe, and the most important myths are those of creation itself. Here, the gods formed existence from chaos, creating the patterns. The rise of the sun god Ra, the myths of Osiris, Isis and Horus, against this chaotic god, Set. Ra rises in the sky and continues the pattern of existence. he goes down each night into the underworld, or duat. The struggle is constant against chaos. Life and death were simply part of this continued pattern, rising like Ra and setting. Mythology inspired and influenced Egyptian culture. Religious rituals and royal leaders, life and death, food, sex, education, art, culture, and more were all part and parcel of the greater living myth of the life of the gods. In a mirror of human dynasties, the gods themselves altered in power. The priests of each deity would use their influence, and there are hundreds of cases of one god usurping a special location and claiming dominance over another. A battle of the gods was truly at work. And so we must begin our journey into the gods themselves. We begin with Amun. Who has been around ever since the Old Kingdom and the earliest days. Known as Amon and Amen, by the 11th dynasty he had become the patron deity of Thebes, the holiest of holy places for the gods. Following a rebellion and the rise of Ahmose I, Amun became nationally important and was fused with the sun god Ra to become Amun-Ra. Across time, Amun-Ra maintained his chief post. The only time this slipped was under the king Akhenaten, who raised Aten to the highest position. Amun-Ra was self-created, champion of the poor and weary. Everybody loved and worshipped him. He was the king of all gods, and almost became monotheistic when other gods were said to be mere manifestations of him. His influence grew so large that nations outside of Egypt began worshipping him, and there are good reasons to suggest that Islamic, Jewish and Christian God is based upon him and his myths. In Greece, Amun-Ra became known as Zeus. Originally, Amun was the god of the wind, until he merged with Ra and also Min, the god of fertility and creation. These newfound powers made him the greatest of the deities. From the Nubian sun god, he adopted the symbol of the ram. He was the god people came to when they wanted mercy for their own wrongdoing, or if they felt wrong done too. He was the god who hears the prayers, who comes at the cry of the poor and distressed. Beware of him, they said. The people were to repeat him to their sons and daughters, to speak his name far and wide. He was big and small. He was all things yet to come, fishes in the deep, birds in heaven. He never spends an entire day angry, and he was merciful. For many years the priests of Amun at Thebes were so powerful that they were effectively the leaders of the nation and held power over the economy. They owned 2/3 of all the temples and 90% of Egypt's ships. The son of one high priest was actually manipulated onto the throne itself, and one high priest himself actually became pharaoh and ruler of the 21st dynasty. By the 10th century BC, this dominance began to decline, but his worship maintained. His influence upon the wider world is actually massive. He is even mentioned in the Bible. In Greece he became Zeus Ammon. After the Battle of Issus, Alexander the Great was declared the son of Amun and considered himself divine. The words ammonia and ammonite are derived from Amun because certain properties were said to be from Amun. We turn now to one of the most mysterious of Egyptian deities seen in copious movies and works of fiction, Anubis. In truth, the word Anubis is the Greek name of an Egyptian deity associated with mummification in the afterlife. He was depicted as a canine, or a man with a canine head, and was known at the time as the golden jackal or the African golden wolf. Just like other Egyptian deities, Anubis had many roles. He was the protector of graves, embalmer, and was later replaced by Osiris as the lord of the underworld. He ushered souls into the afterlife and attended the weighing of their souls. This act would decide whether the dead would be allowed to enter the realm of the dead. His colour is black, which symbolised rebirth from the colour of fertile silt of the Nile, and also the colour of a corpse which turns after embalming. In the Old Kingdom, Anubis was the most important god of the dead. He was replaced in that role by Osiris during the Middle Kingdom. It is because of this association with the mysteries of death and the afterlife that Anubis has crept strongly into popular culture today in a scary way. In fact, he was not at all scary and helped people who had suffered the loss of life to go to a better place. Our next deity is the goddess of warfare in Lower Egypt. In Greece, she is known as Eleuros. In Egypt, she was known as Bastet, and her worship began in the 2nd dynasty. In Upper Egypt, they worship Sekhmet, the lioness goddess, in the same role, and normally at the unification of Upper and Lower Egypt, deities were merged, but in this case, Sekhmet and Bastet maintained their own identities. During the 22nd dynasty, Bastet transformed from lioness warrior deity into a protector deity represented as a cat. During later dynasties, the deity remained, but was assigned a lesser role in the pantheon by bearing the name Bastet instead of the earlier Bast. This happened after Thebes became the capital of ancient Egypt during the 18th dynasty. As they rose to great power, the priests of the temple of Amun shifted the other deities down the league as their own Amun-Ra rose. Bastet was originally a lioness warrior goddess of the sun throughout most of ancient Egyptian history. But later she was changed into the cat goddess, which is familiar today. Greeks, occupying ancient Egypt towards the end of its civilization, changed her into a goddess of the moon. In Lower Egypt, she was defender of the pharaoh and the later deity Ra. Her name was associated with the jars in which Egyptians stored their ointment used as perfume. Bastet thus gradually became regarded as the goddess of perfumes. Because of this, she was regarded as the wife of Anubis, the god of embalming. Our next deity was the most important of all the sacred animals in ancient Egypt. He was worshipped in Memphis and served as a go-between for humans and Ptah, Osiris and Atum. He is the bull god, Apis. His worship is there right at the start of Egyptian history, connected with fertility. Archaeology reveals burials of bulls, indicating that the bull was divine long before, and possibly represented the king himself. His worship continued after the Egyptians with the Greeks and even the Romans, and lasted until the 5th century AD. The bull was chosen because of its strength and virility. It was the manifestation of the pharaoh. Apis was one of the Egyptian gods for which Alexander the Great performed a sacrifice during his seizure of the country from the Persians. We turn now to one of the very earliest of Egyptian deities, Khnum, the god of the source of the Nile. This was an important position, for all life along the river relied upon the annual flooding to bring fertility to the land. He was the god who created human children at his potter's wheel and placed them within the mother's womb. He was the divine potter. In fact, he was the third aspect of Ra, the god of rebirth, creation, and the evening sun. Now one of the most significant deities in Egyptian mythology, the god Horus. There are many depictions of Horus, and Egyptologists treat them all as separate deities, although it is possible they were all just different manifestations of the same deity. He is mostly depicted as a falcon or falcon-headed man. Commonly, Horus is the son of Isis and Osiris and is a rival to Set, although in the earliest form he was their brother. However, there is another tradition that Hathor was his mother and wife. He was the god of the sky, war, and hunting. Horus means falcon, but also the distant one, and the one who is above. In life, the pharaoh was Horus. In death, he became Osiris, two aspects of the same soul. new Horus appeared as a new pharaoh appeared. As the representation or embodiment of Horus, Pharaoh was divine, a god on earth, and because Horus was produced by Atum, the greatest, he was part of Atum, and so therefore was the Pharaoh. Eventually this simply evolved into Pharaoh becoming the son of Ra. The myth of Horus is very interesting and parallels the Christian myth. He was born to the virgin goddess Isis, after she collected the dismembered parts of her murdered husband Osiris. Only his penis was missing, which had been thrown into the Nile. The myths vary, but she eventually managed to get herself pregnant by magic. She fled to escape her jealous brother, Set, and gave birth to Horus. Horus, as the sky, had two eyes. His right eye was the sun, and his left the moon. As a falcon, he flew across the sky. The moon was not as bright as the sun, because he had battled with Set, who gouged out his left eye, and a new one created to replace it. The Eye of Horus is an ancient Egyptian symbol of protection and royal power from deities, in this case from Horus or Ra. The word for this symbol was Wadjet. It was the eye of the one of the earliest of Egyptian deities, Wadjet, who later became associated with Bast, Mut and Hathor as well. Wadjet was a solar deity, and this symbol began as her eye, an all-seeing eye. It was adopted by Horus and Ra. Horus was a god of war and hunting. Thus, he became a symbol of majesty and power, as well as the model of the pharaohs. The pharaohs were said to be Horus in human form. Horus was given the role of protecting humans from his brother, Set, by his mother, Isis. Set was the god of the desert who had killed his father, Osiris. Over time, Horus battled many times with Set to avenge his father and to choose the next pharaoh. The mother of Horus is the great Isis. She was so widely worshipped that her influence spread to Greece and Rome, and indeed, she is associated with Mary, the mother of Jesus. She is seen as the ideal mother and wife. She is the patron of nature and magic, a friend of slaves, sinners, artists, and yet she also hears the prayers of the rich, maidens and rulers. She is the protector of the dead and goddess of children. Her name means throne, and her headdress is often depicted as a throne. She represented the pharaoh's power on earth, and he was her child. He was Horus on earth, God on earth, like Jesus. Her parents were Geb, the god of the earth, and Nut, the goddess of the sky. She married her brother, Osiris. The Nile flooded each year from the tears of sorrow issued forth from Isis. She first appears in the 5th dynasty on a sun temple, although it is believed she was originally a separate deity from pre-dynastic Egypt. She is often depicted as the wife or assistant of a deceased pharaoh, and the mother of the 4 sons of Horus. These 4 sons protected the canopic jars that contained the organs of the deceased pharaoh. Her worship was carried out in a temple known as Isium, with daily offerings from priests and priestesses. These generally had a reputation of being wise, with great healing powers. They could also interpret dreams and control the weather. Isis was associated with the star Sirius, and its appearance was a sign of the new year. She was therefore associated with rebirth and reincarnation. One myth reveals a slightly darker side. Here, she tricks Ra into revealing his secret name by getting a snake to bite him. Only she has the antidote, and because she had his real name, she had power over him. Having a secret name was important for magic spells. Because of this, she became highly important to magicians, and magic is central to the myth of Isis. After the conquest of Egypt, Isis became known as the Queen of Heaven, and she merged with other mother goddesses such as Demeter, Astarte, and Aphrodite. Isis spread throughout the Roman Empire, and is one reason that the Christian Isis, known as Mary, was accepted so easily. The Greek antiquarian Plutarch describes Isis as a goddess exceptionally wise and a lover of wisdom, to whom, as her name at least seems to indicate, knowledge and understanding are in the highest degree appropriate. Of course, her husband suffered a pretty bad fate. Osiris was usually depicted as the god of the underworld. He was also the god of transition, resurrection, and regeneration. He is given green skin, a pharaoh's beard, mummy-wrapped legs, a crown of 2 large ostrich feathers, a crook, and a flail. He was once believed to be the eldest son of the earth god Geb, or the sun god Ra, and the earth goddess Nut. He was the brother and husband of Isis. And his son was Horus. Because he ruled over the dead, and because the dead were considered to be the ones truly living, he was called the King of the Living. He was the judge of the dead in the afterlife, and from his place in the underworld he granted life to all those things such as vegetation rising upwards. He was the Lord of Love, permanently youthful, Lord of Silence, and when a pharaoh died, he became Osiris, who rose from the dead himself. In this way they inherited eternal life. This was later mirrored in the Christian myths. Eternal life through the slain God who rose from the dead, who was the son of Mary or Isis. The 3 aspects of Isis are clearly laid out in the Bible as the 3 Marys, and this is why she is the mother and lover of Jesus. His name probably means powerful one or God Almighty, although nobody is certain. His crook signifies his role as the shepherd god. The flail is unknown, but may be a shepherd's whip, pull and push. His green colour symbolises rebirth. The soul, or Ba, of Osiris was sometimes worshipped as a separate deity, and was known as the soul of the Lord of the Pillar of Continuity. This was the backbone of Osiris, and the Nile itself, the backbone of Egypt. It therefore supplied the water, fertile silt, and vegetation for survival. He died only to be resurrected again each year. This Ba of Osiris was power, and also part of the word for ram, and so he is depicted as a ram-headed god. The living, sacred ram was in fact worshipped and mummified as holy. With the fall of Egypt to the Greeks, Osiris was merged with the Apis bull and became Serapis, and depicted as a standard Greek god. His cult continued on the island of Philae in Upper Egypt until the 6th century AD, until the Romans destroyed the sanctuaries, arrested the priests, and seized the divine images. And now for the deity who slew Osiris, Set. He is the god of the desert, storms, disaster, violence, chaos, and foreigners. Ra employs Set on his solar boat to repel the serpent of chaos, Apep. He was a balance to Horus as the lord of the Red Desert, whereas Horus was the lord of the Black Land, or fertile soil. The opposites of barren and fertility. He killed and mutilated his brother Osiris. Isis put him back together and had Horus as a child. Horus and Set did battle many times. Set is the father of Anubis, and the meaning of his name is unknown. It is likely that it gave rise to Satan in later Christian myth. he is often depicted as a strange and unknown beast. In human form, he has a distinctive head, and sometimes with the head of a donkey. In the mythology of Heliopolis, like Osiris and Isis, Set was born of the sky goddess Nut and the earth god Geb. Myths show Osiris was as wise and happy, Set as the jealous brother. His cult continued for some time and influenced Christian and other religions. We turn now to the wise god, Thoth. He is depicted with the head of an ibis bird, or a baboon. He maintained the universe and stood beside the boat of Ra. He would later arbitrate between the disputes of the gods. He is associated with art, writing, magic, science, and the judgment of the dead. His name simply means he who is like the ibis. In Greece, Thoth was seen as their own god Hermes, and later his title became the thrice great Hermes, or Hermes Trismegistus. For hundreds of years he was the wisest and greatest of gods for magicians and alchemists. As the ibis-headed human form, he represents the reckoner of time and season. He did, however, have a great many roles in Egyptian society. He was the mediator between the powers of good and evil, and ensured balance. He was the scribe of the gods and is credited with inventing writing and alphabets. He reported on the weighing of the scales in the underworld. He was self-created and master of physical and moral law. He calculated the mathematics for the structure of the motions of the heavens. The Egyptians believed that without his words, the gods themselves could not have existed. Indeed, in the underworld, his power was equal to that of Ra and Osiris. He was the author of all science, religion, philosophy, and magic. And the Greeks said he invented astronomy, astrology, mathematics, geometry, medicine, theology, government, and much more. In fact, to them, he was the author of all works of knowledge. Originally, Thoth was a moon god, providing light in the darkness and standing beside Ra, the sun god. The myths of Egypt serve to explain and justify the observable world and its many cycles, patterns and mysteries. The nature of order and chaos. The cycles of life and death, of fertility, seasons, light in the sky, life underwater, the fate of the universe itself. All of this and more was explained through the lives, actions and statements of the gods. From the earth to the sun, from knowledge to imagination, the actions of the gods governed them all. All forces had divine inspiration behind them. They did not believe their gods had animal heads. They simply used symbolism to explain aspects of the power and nature of the gods. As their own writing system of hieroglyphics was symbolic and held multiple meanings, so did their concepts of the gods. They did not think the sky was a cow called Hathor, supported by other gods. This simply explained the power of that goddess and merged several ideas about existence together. Even though there were temples and statues depicting the gods, the real realm of the gods cannot be known or imagined. It is not accessible to humans. The myths create stories to explain in human terms what it all means. It was in fact a very clever device, and one used by later religions, such as Christianity. The myths are in fact never fully developed. We have to fill in many missing blanks. There was a reason behind this, a philosophical statement, saying that we simply cannot know as humans. They only had general outlines and fragments, and the gods themselves would not pass the script test for a Hollywood movie because their characters are never fully developed. The truth is that the meaning is the most important part of the myth, not the detail. As long as the meaning remained, what did it matter that a mere detail was altered? Many of the myths came from earlier times and other cultures. They were adapted for their own environment and people. The same thing would happen to the Egyptian gods, as Greece and Rome, and then Christianity, stole the ideas and changed them.